Hi, I'm Maud Mosley, and my pronouns are they, them. Welcome to Tunes Tuesday. Today, I'm not actually sitting down with a band, but rather with a musician who founded an event in Toronto called Queer Music Jam. Hello, would you like to introduce yourself and maybe a bit about what you do?
Hey, my name is Megan and I go by she, her pronouns. And I am the host and creator of Queer Music Jam. Queer Music Jam is just simply a music jam and a social for anyone of a marginalized gender. And so we get together every Sunday and we play through cover tunes. And every week we play through, it's a different theme, it's a different genre, it's a different set of people, and it's a different set of songs that we play through.
Nice. So it's great having you here, especially for such to talk about such a unique event. So you just talked a little bit about it, but can you tell me more about the event and what got you to start it?
Yeah, so I've been kind of sitting on the idea of starting some kind of like a music jam for queer folks, because as someone who's been a drummer playing for the past like 15 years, 10 years I've been doing it more professionally. It's really tricky to feel um, it's tricky to feel like you're good enough playing in the music industry just because you don't see a lot of that representation of queer folks at kind of any level within the music industry. Um, Shoot, I'm getting really nervous.
That's okay. That's okay. No worries. Take your time to answer.
um, yeah, I would say just in terms of between a lack of representation, a lack of spaces, and a lack of opportunities that I've seen for myself as a musician, it's really tricky to feel like you're good enough in the music industry. Um, and so it really wasn't until I was sitting down at it used to be called the Canadian Lesbian and Gay Archives, but now it's called Just the Archives. And they had like a cool talk that happened. It would have been I think a couple years ago, and they were talking about the erasure of spaces for queer women just in Toronto. But it was really centered around, it would have been mostly the club scene, so just all of the lesbian bars that were kind of closing down. And it made me realize that I really wish there was like some kind of space for music for queer people to participate in. But I really didn't know like how exactly to go about like creating a kind of space that would work. Because it's like what would be the goal of the group? What kind of music would we play? Who would come out to it? It was pretty complicated. Um, but I kind of just decided in February to just kind of go for it and just try and create some kind of a space. So that would have been kind of like the first version of Queer Music Jam. But as we know, in February soon came the pandemic. So we only had gotten, I think, two jams in before we had to just like put it on pause. And then I had kind of decided I really wanted to kind of keep something going for queer people in music during the pandemic. So I thought, maybe I'll try doing like an online open mic for people. So that was kind of Queer Music Jam 2.0, which was a really fun thing, but it wasn't really the same as like having an actual jam full of people. And once the weather got better, I decided I was just kind of thinking like, what if I take my drum set and put it outside? And what if I get like a power bar and see if it will also fit outside, and then have kind of my own backyard jam. And I wasn't sure if it was going to work out or not, if people would want to come and participate. But we've been doing it since I think July, every single Sunday, and it's been going pretty well.
Yeah, I love that. During such a weird situation where we all had to adjust to a lot of things, you have this new event that's already taken so many different forms to try to mold and work with what's possible. So that's really interesting. And I also really appreciate that, a lot of the energy behind this event comes from the fact that there's specifically not a lot of spaces for queer women and lesbian specific spaces as well as you mentioned with the archives. Because I feel like that's something a lot of people in the community notice as we like constantly see like, yeah, there's like gay bars and gay clubs and gay events, but they all seem like very, very centered around like gay men and hypermasculinity and like, performing like gender, expressing yourself in like very, very particular ways. So making spaces outside of that narrative is so necessary, like incredibly so. And then so next, you kind of touched on this a bit, but queer people across industries talk about the need to like carve out spaces for themselves wherever they are. And Queer Music Jam relates to that, but kind of differs as it creates its own separate space that is, specifically for queer people. So, what's the importance of having a music space that is exclusively for queer people?
Yeah, I think it's super important, especially with the music industry, whether we're thinking of even just like an open mic in Toronto or going into a recording studio. Like it's very clear that there's like a lack of women, there's a lack of queerness in each of these spaces. It's very cis hetero male dominated spaces. So like across the board, I would say there's like a lack of representation. Even if you're trying to think of just like a famous queer drummer, like I can't really think of one. But I personally know like so many queer drummers in Toronto that like two of them share a birthday with me. So it's like there's definitely people out there that love music, but feeling like you belong in the music scene, I find is a little bit trickier. And with that, so there's like a lack of representation, a lack of space. That also means that there's usually like a lack of opportunity. So either that's you're not getting the opportunity to perform in these spaces, or even if you do get the opportunity, you may not feel good enough to actually like follow through with it. So I thought it'd be cool to kind of create a space where there would be that opportunity for people to play and for people to network and hopefully for people to also just feel good about making music because that's really the goal.
Yeah, absolutely. And I like, when we bring up the fact that like we can't think about a lot of these people off the top of our heads. I mean, even myself who cares so much about, representation in music and having these conversations, the second you were like, not many people can name a queer drummer, I was like, there's one at the top of my head. I can name one. And, that shows my own issues where I'm not necessarily like, putting in as much research and finding them as much. But then I just think about like how many other people can't even name one. It's like I know one because I care about this music world and I'm interested in drumming. But people who aren't going to seek that information out and they're really going to miss out on all the talented people that are out there for sure. Yeah, so as you mentioned, this event existed prior to the pandemic and was being carried out in kind of a recording space. And when studio spaces became, closed or unsafe for groups, you said, you tried this online thing, and then you really interestingly moved it, into your backyard, which when you like look at the content you post on Instagram, I think it adds this really nice energy, this like fun homey vibe that I feel just like goes like pairs really well with the queerness of it. Something that like to me it just passes off as like meeting up and really hanging out with your friends, and I love to see that. But what was the decision like to continue this event while the pandemic was happening, and how has running it been? Because obviously there's a lot more to consider, and as far as safety and safe spaces go.
Yeah, for sure. So I was planning on keeping the online open mic kind of going throughout the pandemic. I didn't really necessarily have plans to start up the Queer Music Jam in person jam, but one of my best friends had. I reached out to them to be like, "Yo, do you want to like come and perform on the open mic?" But they had a concussion like in January that they were still recovering from, so any kind of tech just wasn't cool for them. So they had the idea of just like having me come over to their porch to just like bring an acoustic guitar. We could have like a little a little acoustic jam. And I really wanted to try and do something a little bit more for them. So the initial jams was just me and my pal going in my backyard and jamming, and it was just like, it's not often as a musician that you play outside, especially for like drums, because lugging them outside is like not the funnest. But I have a backyard space which is just like perfect. So I kind of said to them, just like, what if I just like take my drums, put them outside, maybe get a power bar long enough to fit outside my front door that we could hook up an electric guitar to it. And that first jam was like super magical, just being outside, making music, singing along to Kids in America. Like it was just, it was amazing. And within our jams of just the two of us, we were like, we wish that like more people could participate. And so that really started making me think of like, what if I started up the actual queer music jams again to get more people? Because another thing that I often find in just being a queer drummer, and I play for a lot of queer singer songwriters, they're always just like, "Do you know like a queer bass player or a queer synth player?" And I'm like, I don't. I'm sorry, but that had kind of come up here where my pal was just like, "Do you know like a queer bass player who would be open to joining with us?" And because of the initial queer music jam, I did know a bass player, so I had asked her to come out and play. So that networking had already, even just, two jams in from that first initial queer music jam, I was already starting to network with other people. And then from there, it was just like, well, what if we open it up to other people? It wasn't really too sure like how COVID anxious other folks were going to be about joining in this group in the midst of the pandemic. Um, some people have said that I'm being a little bit irresponsible with having different groups of people come out to these jams every week. So it's a tricky thing to navigate. I do try my best to try and ensure that everyone feels as safe as possible. Even if I don't necessarily, I don't require masks at the jams because they're outdoors. But if someone were to come to me and say, "Hey, I'd feel a lot more comfortable if everybody was wearing masks," then I would definitely set up a jam that was like masks only, and set up those precautions. So I'm trying to do my best to like navigate between being as COVID safe as possible, but also trying to provide like a space for folks to come out and jam. Because I think for a lot of musicians, it's really hard to get together with other musicians. So those opportunities are even less than what they were before. So a lot of the people who haven't played in like a really long time, they come out to these jams and they're just like, "Whoa, I haven't played with people for like months. Like this is just amazing and it's cathartic." So that's kind of why I'm still like keeping them going.
Absolutely. Yeah. And, with the outdoor nature of this, obviously, the weather's getting colder. We're starting to get our first snowfalls. So that's not something that's going to be able to last much longer. But is this something you're looking forward to carrying out more in the future in other ways, potentially, or in similar ways next summer?
Yeah, we'll kind of see like how the pandemic keeps going. I'm hoping to, if it's possible to, and if people are open to it, of actually having the jams happen in my apartment, with probably even less people, with masks absolutely required, and as many safety precautions as possible that I can kind of implement. But even past that, I do kind of see other opportunities for the queer music jams to kind of expand. Like right now, I'm kind of working on trying to figure out how to record from my own, just kind of with what I have. Because recording tends to be especially a financial barrier for a lot of people to record their own music and put it out there on Spotify or YouTube or wherever. So I'd love to be able to offer some kind of like DIY demos that are like good enough for people to like put out into the world. I think that'd be really great. And then another really cool thing I think would be amazing is if I could partner with some kind of a bar, a queer bar in Toronto who would be happy to like host like a queer open mic so that folks who participate in the queer music jams, both can just kind of DIY their own bands on stage, which would be epic. But then we could also have an audience because that also does sometimes come up with the queer music jams of people who just want to watch the backyard queer music jam.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, that looks like there's a lot of exciting things to look forward to, which I love to hear. Hopefully, once it's safe enough, I would definitely love to be an audience member at one of these queer music jams. That seems like a lot of fun, especially if I'm like watching the bands come together on stage and figure it out, and have that bit of like awkwardness. That's just a good time as people navigate playing with each other in a new environment. But for that, I'm going to make sure to link, your Instagram information below for this event. Hopefully, if people get interested in it from this conversation with you, which I hope they do, they can check it out. They can maybe participate in the future, which would be really exciting. So thank you so much for joining me today. I really appreciate you taking the time to do this and to have these conversations. But yeah, thank you. And thank you for listening. I'll let you sign off if there's any last things you'd like to say.
Yeah, no, thank you so much for having me. It's been amazing to just talk about the history of the Queer Music Jam and just kind of what it means to have this kind of music space. But yeah, if anybody wants to follow Queer Music Jam, the Instagram handle is at Queer Music Jam, quite simply. Cool.
Amazing. Okay. Well, thank you. Bye.